remains precariously poised on the brink of an abyss. The promises of the new state for peace, justice, and opportunity have been squandered. I'm appalled by the scale of sexual violence documented by our human rights teams. We demand accountability for all atrocities and the leaders of South Sudan to commit to the peace process.
Poised on the brink of an abyss, South Sudan descended into chaos earlier this month as the peace deal signed less than a year ago collapsed. After fighting erupted outside the presidential compound, the first Vice President, Riek Machar, has fled the capital. But now President Salva Kiir has replaced him with Taban Dengai in a move that some believe could push the state back into civil war. So with Machar missing in action, can peace be restored to the world's youngest nation? And what exactly happened to put South Sudan back on the brink? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, South Sudan's new vice president has promised to do everything he can to bring peace to the country. Taban Dengai has been sworn in, formally replacing opposition leader Riek Machar. Riek Machar, whose whereabouts are still unknown, claims his rival President Salva Kiir is trying to have him killed. CCTV's Patrick Oyet has more.
Just 3 months ago, Riek Machar was sworn in as first vice president. He's now been replaced by his chief negotiator and former mining minister, Taban Dengai. The move indicates tensions within the opposition, but President Kiir has downplayed the issue, saying the implementation of the 2015 peace deal must continue with or without Machar.
Of course, this agreement cannot be personalized. That if X is away, the agreement will be shelved until when that person comes.
Dengai, who is now the commander-in-chief of the opposition's armed forces, says his responsibility is towards the thousands of South Sudanese who have been displaced from their homes.
I will struggle to bring you out from the suffering. You already You don't deserve to be displaced in your own country.
The Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, which oversees the implementation of the African Union-backed peace deal, is prepared to work with Dengai.
If the IO agree among themselves, they make proposals to the president and he accepts, we welcome that.
The new vice president has also promised to negotiate Riek Machar's return. However, Machar has refused to come back to Juba until neutral force of African Union troops is deployed in the country, something President Kiir is dead set against. Patrick Oyet, CCTV, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, in the wake of the fresh political unrest, I spoke to South Sudan's ambassador and permanent representative to the African Union, James Pitia Morgan, on the sidelines of the recent African Union summit. He assessed the situation as well as South Sudan's commitment to its citizens. Ambassador Morgan, thank you very much for your time. First of all, let's start by you giving us an analysis of exactly what is happening in South Sudan at the moment, because there is a lot of regional concern following the latest flare-up of violence.
Thank you very much once again. What I want to tell you today is that South Sudan is calm following the clashes that took place. Our president came out and ordered every soldier to go back to the barracks. And since then, we have never heard anything again. It is quiet as we speak.
There are 3 issues also that IGAD proposed, and one of them was imposing an immediate arms embargo on South Sudan and enacting additional targeted sanctions on leaders and commanders who have been unraveling the peace process. What's your view on that?
That proposal came from the UN Secretary General, and for us that thing was not new, because even from 2005 the United Nations Security Council had been talking about sanctions. So we see that was not fair. What is the reason of sanctioning South Sudan, and what is the reason of putting targeted sanctions on our leaders? They are working to implement the peace. Now if you are going to sanction them, how will they work with their colleagues in the region, the continent and beyond? There is no need for sanctioning anybody, our leaders. Our leaders are committed to implement this peace. And first and foremost, this is the first accident. And we, as the people of South Sudan, and as the government, we feel that calling for sanctions and calling for embargo because of this kind of accident is not justifiable, it is premature, and it is uncalled for, because this peace has been put for 30 months. So this is the first accident. And if we start doing this at the first accident, and we don't know what lies ahead, we are human beings. We are prone to make mistakes. So we really call even the member, the Security Council, the UN Security Council. Of course here our brothers in the continent, they understand. Because the problem is not that it is only in South Sudan. All of these countries in this continent, we have gone through these difficulties. So we really appeal to the members of the Security Council who are always talking about sanctions. This one, they want to destroy everything in that young country. So we call them that this is the first accident. Let them just watch and see whether we will succeed. We need them to help us to succeed.
What is South Sudan's commitment now from its leaders? What is South Sudan's commitment to IGAD, member states, to the region, to the African continent, and to the international community, and more importantly, to its own South Sudanese nationals?
This is our commitment, that the region should know that the peace that was signed, it was they who prepared it, and our commitment that we sign it. We would have rejected that. First of all, we didn't negotiate it to be this way. But once we sign it, that was our commitment to the region. And the region should know that we are for them. And we listen to what they tell us, because we are a young nation and we need their guidance. So that is why the peace agreement itself, called the compromise peace agreement, was not based on what we wanted. But once they told us that this is the way forward, we didn't hesitate. We signed it. But the president said the peace he was having a reservation on one thing. Because when we were signing the peace, the rebel movement by then was already split. So the president appealed to his colleagues that, look, most of you in the region had been soldiers. And you know when a movement like this is split, there will be no commitment from the other side, because the side that broke away may continue to fight because they are not part of this command anymore. And those reservations were denied. That no. So the president said, okay, if that's the case, let us go ahead. And now, as we speak, I think the world has to prove the president right, because he said earlier that when the rebel movement split and signing peace with one faction, and there was another faction led by Peter Gadet, he knew that this was going to be problematic. And he told his brothers here in the region that this is my reservation. It will be problematic. And now it has happened. So we are committed to this region. We are committed to listen to them and let them also listen to us, because at the end of the day, the peace ends with the people of South Sudan. And it is the people of South Sudan who will be the beneficiary. And we need peace in the first place. We really need peace. And let the region help guide us as we accepted to sign the peace, which they made it as a compromise peace agreement. We didn't refuse. We signed it.
Ambassador Morgan, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, IGAD has been central in efforts to reinstate lasting peace in South Sudan. The regional body steered efforts leading to the signing of the peace agreement in August of last year. I spoke to IGAD's Executive Secretary, Ambassador Mahbub Maalim, to find out their response to the latest unrest. thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the situation in South Sudan, because IGAD was a major facilitator in the peace process in South Sudan. Assess that situation for us today following the latest flare-up of violence.
Just like anybody else, we are also really dismayed about what seems to have happened in South Sudan. Realizing the fact that South Sudanese have fought for about 50 years in 2 batches of 25 years until the signing of the CPA in 2005. Then the peace held for a while, and then we all celebrated the much hyped referendum to which to the man, almost 100%, voted for independence. Then we celebrated the independence. So if there is something that everybody else was sure, just as we are, that was not going to happen, was that South Sudan, Republic of South Sudan, was going to go through another cycle of violence. Towards the end of May, early June, I was there myself. I met the president, I met the first vice president, I met several ministers of foreign affairs. And despite the fact that, you know, the operationalization of agreements has its own natural teething problems, nothing seemed to be extraordinary at the time.
Right, but in terms of IGAD's position on this latest flare-up of violence, how worried are IGAD member states, and what is IGAD's proposal?
Well, IGAD is not actually worried as such. They are seriously concerned. And I can tell you that IGAD will not accept, will not condone. This will not continue. We had an urgent ministerial meeting in Nairobi. There is a communique where about 7 demands were made. And if the demands are not met, there are specific recommendations that have been made, including the reconfiguration of the mandate of UNMISS and the proposal to have expanded membership through levels of UNMISS from the region. So I see that as a very, very serious, stand from our point of view.
Right, Ambassador, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll have expert analysis on the situation inside South Sudan. To stay with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, including our friends in the IGAD, our friends in AU, our friends in UN, and in the international community as a whole, we have not done this illegally, not we, it is the IO, they have not done this illegally. And we in the government headed by our president is only in respect of the will of the IO and also in accordance with this agreement. So where are we going?
That was the second vice president of South Sudan, James Wani Iga, defending the appointment of Taban Dengai as the new first vice president. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to further offer an analysis on the situation in Juba, I have expert guests standing by. In London, Professor Alex Duvall, he is the Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation. In Nairobi, political commentator Professor Macharia, and with me here in studio is Vincent Kemosabe. He's a policy analyst at Sovereign Group. Welcome and thank you for joining us on the program. Professor Duvall, I'm going to start off with you there. First, give us your impression on the developments inside South Sudan. There is a new first vice president that has been appointed. What do you make of the developments?
I don't think it should be taken that seriously. I think what it is, it's another effort by President Salva Kiir and the people around him to maintain a pretense of normality. In fact, what we've had in the last couple of weeks is really a major move by the president and the people around him to dismantle what was left really of the very fragile peace agreement that was enforced on him, arm-twisted on him by the international community last August. This is not going to solve any problems in South Sudan. It's just a prelude to a further intensification of political differences and armed conflict.
Vincent, do you think those developments are going to exacerbate the already deplorable situation there?
Yes. We need to... the former president of United States, Jimmy Carter, once said that you do not make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And it's not good to build walls, but build bridges. So I think what we are seeing with President Salva Kiir is really an unfortunate development, considering the very precarious nature of the peace situation in South Sudan. What this therefore will do is that it will alienate the very people it needs to bring closer. What South Sudan needed was a leader like Nelson Mandela, somebody who was going to transcend beyond the division and inspire the nation. So because of the tribal nature of our politics, the divisive nature of politics in Africa, what you've seen is that he's actually exploited that situation to entrench the system. And what I can tell you is that things are actually moving to the south in South Sudan.
Professor Duvall, I'll come back to you though, and looking back at how South Sudan has gotten itself into this position, because it just recently announced that a peace deal and stability were finally there for the country. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon did say that South Sudan is now staring into an abyss. How did it get there?
Well, I think the fundamental problem with the peace agreement that was forced on the parties last August was that it set the political clock back to the day before the war began. And what it therefore didn't address was the reasons why that war began and escalated in the way it did. So there was a political competition between President Salva Kiir and several other rivals, prominent among whom, he wasn't the only one, but he was the most prominent, was his former Vice President, Riek Machar. They couldn't resolve that conflict politically. And one of the reasons they couldn't do that was that the strategy that the president had adopted over the previous years was what he called the big tent strategy of bringing everybody into the government. And the way he did that was by using all the revenue of government, and it was a fairly substantial revenue, to allow them to eat at the same trough. There was a massively corrupt system, a massive spending, particularly on the payroll for the military, for more than 700 generals, etc. And that money was running out due to mismanagement and the low price of oil. So the political conflict that would have been simply allowing people to be corrupt and satisfy themselves couldn't be managed in that way. And then, as soon as the conflict turned violent, the army split along ethnic lines. And the reason for that was the army was not a unified, professional, institutionalized army. Rather, it was a collection and alliance of ethnic militia, each of the units loyal to its commander only. So that whenever there was a conflict of whatever nature, be it political, be it ethnic or whatever, it would inevitably take an ethnic turn. Now, the problem was that the agreement did not resolve those problems. It did not resolve the political competition, it simply postponed it. It did not provide resources, and in fact South Sudan was now completely bankrupt. There was no money to pay anybody, and above all, the most fundamental problem was that it entrusted the security of the capital city, Juba, to the forces of the two contenders, which were bitterly unreconciled, bitterly opposed to each other. It was an insane idea, and it was only a matter of time before violence broke out, as indeed happened just a couple of weeks ago.
Vincent, is that how you see it, though, that the peace deal, the way it was structured in itself, was not really going to hold up to its task?
I think if we had the political goodwill, as I was pointing out earlier, that it's actually an indictment on the leadership strength of President Salva Kiir. If he wanted to inspire and to move his country forward, I believe with political goodwill can actually help move a lot of, the situation and ensure that Salva Kiir together with Machar work towards an amicable solution, because there is resources also there. Then we also have interest groups that the two groups represent. So when you have political will coming from the president himself, things would actually be better than it is. And I agree with him that because of ethnicity, not having a professional army, that actually did not make things better, but even worse. Because if you talk to, and I wish we had a representative of Machar here, he would actually point out that Machar is also being driven by interests. So this interest needs to be challenged or actually be addressed, not fully, but in a way that we keep the peace, because the South Sudan today is in a worse situation. Actually, it's unfortunate that 6 years down the line, many South Sudanese are living in a more precarious situation, unlike even before the country was born.
Let me draw in Professor Macharia Munene here and also get your views on what's going on inside South Sudan. Now, Professor, from the outset there, it looks like President Salva Kiir and the SPLM in opposition with the appointment of Taban Dengai are in tandem, are in agreement. Has this development, though, started to bring or push South Sudan forward finally?
The developments in Southern Sudan, to start with, very unfortunate, because the world expected better of them than what we have witnessed in the last few years, not to mention the last few months. One, the people, the leadership of Southern Sudan would appear as if it never learned from the mistakes of the rest of the African countries, because they had time to learn before they became independent. It appears also that there is a lot of selfishness involved, driving all the factions towards war instead of towards peace. And what we've noticed in the recent times is power in such a way that the appointment of a new deputy president, while the other one is still saying that he is the deputy president without being in the center, in the seat of power, is kind of comical in itself. And it is a shame to the leadership of the political leadership of Southern Sudan, whether it's on the side of the president or the former deputy president. They need to get their act together because they don't have it.
Right, Professor Duvall, then, from what we've just heard, then from all the experts on this panel, it seems that South Sudan is in a dire situation now. So exactly how divided, though, is the opposition? What is going to happen now with South Sudan? What is the way forward here?
I think the initiative no longer can be entrusted to the South Sudanese political elite. It's fairly clear they've had several chances of sorting out their political differences and putting their country on the track towards democracy, development, peace and security, and they've failed. The African Union 2 years ago had a commission of inquiry into human rights violations which found that all sides during the recent war committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now, the same actors with the same units are now fighting the same war. It would be naive to suppose they would do anything other than commit war crimes and crimes against humanity, and indeed we are seeing that. There has essentially been a coup against the constitutional order, fragile though it was. Now, this gives two reasons why the African Union, the neighboring states, should intervene, should send forces in order to protect civilians and in order to restore some progress towards a constitutional order and democracy. So I think the initiative now lies not with the South Sudanese leadership, but with the African leadership that has indeed decided that it would make ready forces from neighboring countries and from Rwanda and elsewhere in Africa to provide a force intervention brigade to go in, protect the civilians of Juba, demilitarize the city, and ensure that the peace process can be put back on track. And I think that is where the initiative must now lie.
Professor Macharia, though, with that argument, South Sudan itself has rejected a regional force to go into South Sudan. Would that have been the way to go, though? And what is the political and the humanitarian impact of South Sudan's rejection of that regional force?
It would likely exacerbate the situation. We expect to see more refugees filtering into the neighboring countries like Uganda and Kenya, which in itself is a burden to those countries. But it also appears to be ill-advised, the rejection of a force to come and be kind of a buffer zone between the two sides, so as they can have time to rethink themselves and cool down the temperatures. So the outright rejection of the suggestion can mean that the situation will intensify for the worse, which is not a very good picture. It also raises the question of the capacity of the neighboring countries to intervene on humanitarian grounds, because it requires a lot of resources, it requires political will, it requires commitment, and sometimes we may be asked whether the countries concerned have all those capacities in order to do an effective job of helping Southern Sudan to redeem itself from itself.
Right. Vincent, is that the way to go, though, a regional force for South Sudan now?
Yes, and on top of that, I think the UN Security Council should pass a resolution, possibly sanctioning the two leading lights, because that will put pressure on them, because they hold the future and the destiny of the country together. And then also the possibility of holding those who've committed international crimes accountable. I know Africa's experience with the ICC, looking at the Kenyan context, might not be a rosy one, but people need to be held accountable. These are lives, and we've had the experience of Rwanda, Burundi. Things have to be, we cannot allow South Sudan to go the way it is going. So combine local solution together with international solution so that South Sudan is salvaged, because truly it is tinkering on the precipice of destruction, and this must be stopped.
Right. Professor Duvall, you did start the conversation about now being a regional problem and no longer a problem for the South Sudan government on its own. But South Sudan has rejected the proposal by the regional group IGAD to send in a regional force. What next then?
I think the route to agreement in Juba lies through Kampala. If the government of Uganda, if President Museveni were to advise President Kiir to cooperate with the region, and indeed if President Museveni were to himself become part of that regional solution, I don't think the objections would be sustained. I think that the government of South Sudan would then have no option but to comply with that intervention. Now, there's no question that it would be a difficult and long-term intervention. But I think we have reached the point that there is really no option but for the region to take a leading role in providing essential security for the capital city of South Sudan and the citizens who live there, and thereby providing the space for some form of democracy to move forward in South Sudan.
Right. Professor Macharia Munene, how do you see this situation now unfolding in coming days, in coming weeks, in coming months?
It may be necessary for any country that feels strong enough and have capacity to discuss forthrightly with both Salva Kiir and Machar and say put the cards on the table. This is what's going to happen, because the countries are not expected to watch a situation deteriorate to a point where it is a no-return position. So I think we ask the neighboring countries to talk direct to the leadership and just tell them that things are not good for them. I would not go the way of saying that the ICC should come in, given that the ICC has failed in its previous attempts to do anything right. So it would not even be encouraging. These are not the people to be threatened with ICC things. So they need some other tactic, but no threats about ICC.
And that's all we have time for this week, but thank you to my guests for their insights. In London, Professor Alex Duvall, he's the Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation. In Nairobi, political commentator Professor Macharia Munene, and with me here in studio, Vincent Kemosabe, he's a policy analyst at Sovereign Insight. Thank you very much for joining us on Talk Africa. And remember, you can continue this conversation with us online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for another edition of Talk Africa. Goodbye.